Hi everyone. Something very different today that I think you're going to really enjoy. I'm here to speak with Paul Levy today, who has been a Tibetan Buddhist, practiced Tibetan Buddhism for over 30 years and studied with some of the greatest masters in Tibet and Burma. And he also has a deep interest in quantum physics and has pulled those two subjects together. He runs a practice, very busy practice in helping others to awaken to the dreamlike nature of reality. We're going to be talking about a lot about that. He's written 4 books in total, including Dispelling Witeko, Awakened by Darkness, and most recently, The Quantum Revelation, which is what we're going to be really focusing on principally today. And I love on the front cover, you've got this amazing endorsement from Sting. The quantum revelation is mind blowing. That was one heck of an endorsement, Paul. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be here with you. Really, just thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, it's going to be a joy because as everyone listening will know, I've actually quoted Paul several times in previous videos, and both quantum physics and Buddhism have, I'm deeply interested in both of those. But we're going to dive even deeper today because here I'm in conversation with an expert. So before we really get going into your pulling together quantum physics and Tibetan Buddhism, Paul. How did you initially get into this? If you can just briefly share that with us.
Yeah, no, for sure. And my background is a little bit one of a kind in that, I just, was a normal, happy, healthy kid. And then there was this severe trauma, and the story isn't important. But it had to do with my family, and my father played the key role, and it just created enormous suffering for me. And I'm talking about, college or, right after college. And I went so deeply inwards into my own mind because that was the only thing that was alleviating the suffering, even in the slightest bit. And after almost 2 years of really going just deeply inwards, I had this life transforming spiritual awakening. I got hit by a bolt of lightning in meditation, not from outside, but in my brain. It just ignited. And within hours, I began to have the realization that we're having a collectively shared dream, that this is nothing other than a dream that all of us are conjuring up moment by moment into materialization. And I was 24, so I was so excited at what I was realizing and just filled with enthusiasm. I couldn't contain my excitement that it immediately got me in trouble. And within hours, I got thrown in a mental hospital and told, "Oh, you're mentally ill. You'll have this illness the rest of your life." Blah blah blah. And I knew I wasn't. It could not have been, any more clear to me inside my mind that I was awakening to the nature of reality and to who I was and who we all are. And so that's what saved my life, my own inner certainty. But during that next almost 2 years, maybe three, four other times, I got thrown in hospitals and diagnosed. And it was, I see now, and I saw sort of a few years afterwards that because at first I was like, wow, this is really getting in the way of my awakening. It's really a mistake. This shouldn't be happening. But then I began to realize, no, this was part of the awakening. This was my descent into the underworld. And so I was quickly able to extricate myself from the psychiatric community and just one to come full circle. Here I am, and I now have psychiatrists who are students of mine and clients of mine and paying me money to talk to me. So it's come, really full circle. And I'm basically saying the same thing in my books today that I was saying this was like, almost 50 years ago. But instead of getting thrown in hospitals, people are like paying attention and really studying my work, you know. And then I found I should just connect this to Tibetan Buddhism and quantum physics. So I got out of the last hospital in 1982, and I was then had two traumas, the trauma from my father and then the trauma from the psychiatric community, which was almost worse. I mean, that almost killed me. And I was in such deep suffering, and I knew I had to connect with something or someone that could help. And I was fortunate to find these great Tibetan teachers, these lamas who I deeply connected with. This was in, 83, 84. and they've been like family to me. I just saw one a few months ago. He came out to Portland to visit. And so I'm, a very serious Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. But then I found, like a lot of us, you read, just beginning books on quantum physics, the Tao of physics, stuff like that. And I began to recognize, wait a second, they're describing the world that I had fallen into, because as soon as I had my process, things began happening in my life that were physically impossible, that were not supposed to be able to happen, that could only happen in a dream, but they were happening on a regular basis. And then I found quantum physics, and they began articulating the very world that I was inhabiting. And so then I just, over decades, because I'm not a physicist, I've never taken a course in physics, I just want to make that clear. But based on my own experience of wow, this is like a dream. We think this is real and solid and separate and objective, but it's actually very much exactly like being inside of a dream. And the more I understood and studied quantum physics, the more I began to develop the language to articulate what I was inwardly experiencing. So I was really fortunate between encountering Tibetan Buddhism and quantum physics.
Yeah, because I just love this whole idea that our reality is not a fixed external one. It's something I talk a lot about. That it has a deeply participatory, dreamlike quality, which we
Right.
can adjust through our own mastery, through our own focus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'd love to actually read. This was my absolute favorite paragraph from your book, if I may. This is on page 3. This is a terrific book, by the way. This is page 370 in the book, and I really love it. Very powerful, very empowering. So you say, one of the greatest sovereign powers that we all yield as human beings, although often unknowingly or without awareness, is the power of choosing where to place our attention. As if we all have an unknown superhero power, the very power of creation lies invisibly enfolded within our field of attention. Quantum physics reveals to us that turning our gaze of attention towards anything is a powerful creative act that alters, energizes, and potentiates whatever our gaze falls on. Focusing our attention is an act of creation in and of itself. Our beam of attention intersects and interacts with the multi-dimensional probability waves that hover in a ghost-like state of unrealized potentiality that comprise matter in its unobserved state.
Yeah, yeah.
Sensationally profound paragraph. I just love
Wow.
it. And that's the paragraph I've quoted actually previously from you. I mean, that is so
Right.
powerful, but it really takes us out of victim into empowerment. So
Yeah, yeah.
can you enlarge a little bit on this?
Oh, completely. And it's funny, since that book that I wrote, The Quantum Revelation, I've more come across the etymology of the word to observe is related to pregnancy. The idea being that when
Oh,
we observe something, it's in service of giving birth to something. So we all have, as these sovereign beings, we have this incredible superhero power. Let's put it that way. Not only of our attention and how we place our attention and what we pay attention to, but we are participating in invoking our experience of the world. And if I could just give an example to make this really clear. Now, say if say at night we're in a dream. So imagine, if people can imagine that you're in a dream. Now, what is a dream? But it's this reflection of the mind, right? It's just reflecting the very mind that's the dreamer. So if I'm holding a particular perspective in a dream, the dream being just nothing other than a reflection of the mind is going to just give me all the evidence confirming the very viewpoint I'm holding. Okay, now say if in that dream that I'm holding this perspective that this world I'm in is objective, is solid, is separate from myself, right? Being a dream, which is nothing other than a projection of the mind, if I'm holding that viewpoint, the dream instantaneously will give me all the evidence confirming my viewpoint. So it'll manifest as if it's objective. And then I have all the confirmation I need, proving to myself that my viewpoint is correct. And so then I get even more fixed in my viewpoint. And the more fixed in my viewpoint that the world is separate and real and objective from me, the more the dream, which just reflects my own mind, just endlessly supplies me with all the evidence and proof I need, confirming my viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a self-replicating feedback loop whose origin is within our own mind. And what I'm describing is we've actually entranced ourselves. We've put ourselves under a spell, and that's the nature of our situation. That our species, it's like a fairy tale where we have fallen under a spell. And, I can talk for me to the extent, because I'm a work in progress like all of us, to the extent that I've awakened from my spell, then what I see in myself is just this natural impulse to want to be in service and help other people to break out of the spell. And what I'm describing, this is the nature of our situation as human beings, that we're actually beginning to awaken out of the spell. And one way to think about the spell, because with my next book, I'm writing about the psychiatrist Jung, Carl Jung, and he keeps on talking about that the greatest danger that faces our species is to be found in the human psyche. That, or he'll even say that the greatest danger, or when we fall into collective psychoses, or like a psychic epidemic. And that's exactly what's happening now. And when we fall into collective psychosis, everybody reinforces the unconscious spell that each of us are under. And there's no outside reflection. Anybody who reflects to the people under the spell that they're asleep, they get demonized. And so there's an impenetrable sort of bubble so that no external reflection can actually get in to break the spell. So I'm pointing out that our species has fallen asleep as if we're under a spell. There's a collective psychosis going on. But then there are those of us who are awakening. And in a way, we become, in a sense, to speak from the pharmaceutical point of view, an antipsychotic agent. We become antipsychotic agents that help other people to awaken to our nature. Because what I was describing in that scenario where if we see the world as objective, then we create all the evidence confirming our viewpoint. That's exactly what our situation is. But the subtext is that each of us have this unimaginably, this vast creative superhero power to create our experience of the world, right? So I just want to be careful. I'm not saying we create everything out there. As things happen, okay, whatever happens, happens. But we have this intrinsic superhero power by the way we interpret what's happening. Think about a dream. A dream is a projection of the mind. A projection is an ink blot. We actually interpret the ink blot. So if I see an ink blot and say, oh, it's a butterfly, it's not like one moment that I'm thinking it's a butterfly and 2 moments later it appears. No, instantaneously, the very moment that I view the butterfly, it appears in that way. But we've entranced ourselves by this creative superhero power in a way that's killing us. So what I'm pointing out is that we all, each one of us, have this incredible creative genius inside of us, but to the extent that we're not conscious of it, it gets turned against us in a way that puts us asleep, that puts us under the spell, and then we connect with other people who are doing the same, and we reinforce each other's asleepness. That's the collective psychosis. And the evidence, then what happens? We're killing ourselves. That there's no debate about. And so what I'm trying to point out is the root origin of this process and try to help people to unlock it so that we can connect consciously with our creative agency. Like you were saying, we're participating This is what quantum physics, in essence, discovered, that this universe doesn't exist objectively separate from us, but we are participating moment by moment in the creation of the universe. And that's radical. And like you're saying, that cuts through feeling like a victim.
Yeah, I love all that, Paul, because I've often talked about if you have a particular worldview, then you are, as you said so beautifully, you're going to get continual reinforcement of that. The world's a big scary
Right.
place. You're going to be,
Right.
listening to certain narratives. The people you're going to be with are going to be reinforcing that view. You're going to get evidence from all around you, the social media you
Exactly.
consume. Whereas if you have a different worldview, which is the world is beautiful and we're going through a conscious evolution, a massive jump, I believe, in humanity's evolution, then the media you consume, the conversations you have, the people you surround yourself with are going to reinforce and give you evidence of that.
Right.
However, that is less visible than the drama, the color, the tangibility of our
Right.
past. So it's, I think, much harder for people who are embedded in the drama to see what people who are talking about humanity's evolution are talking about. Well, they say, give me the evidence. It's invisible. What do you, here's poppycock. It's,
Right.
but it's equally valid because those people living in that or having that worldview of humanity's evolution are equally getting that worldview reinforced. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's something I've talked about a lot, but you're saying it much more beautifully and profoundly than I've been able to say it. So it's fascinating. And what might be helpful here, because I loved, and it's something, again, I've referred to in past videos, was your article on the butterfly. If you'd like
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
share
Yeah.
that with us, because
Sure. Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
such an appropriate metaphor for where we are right now. So would you like to
Yeah,
share
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Totally, totally. So no, and that article I was thinking about for a number of years, and then it just came out in one day, when the time was right. It was very interesting. And then, we're all aware, so there's a caterpillar and then it goes into the chrysalis and turns into this liquid goo. And, it's in the process of transforming itself into a butterfly. But the thing which for me is the most interesting is so in that goo. So if you think about the caterpillar, it's experiencing, and I imagine that it's experiencing an identity crisis when it's in that liquid goo. Like, who am I? It's in a bardo, a Tibetan word, the in between, the gap between being the caterpillar and being the butterfly. It's neither one nor the other. And we're in that state of like, who are we? What is our identity? But the thing which is most interesting to me is that in that liquid goo, these imaginal cells start coming out from the liquid goo of the caterpillar, and those imaginal cells hold the image, the inner image of the butterfly, right? The soon-to-be butterfly, the future self. But the actual part that's still the caterpillar, that's still the liquid goo, experiences those imaginal cells as an invader. So there's a conflict. So it starts attacking these imaginal cells, which makes the imaginal cells even stronger. And they then start to replicate even more, right? And that's the very process that eventuates into the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The point being that we are in that bardo right now, that experience where we're not quite who, we haven't fully actualized into our higher selves, as we're, sort of in this state of awakening and evolving, but we've stepped out of just this separate self, because that's really, the problem when we identify as being separate, and then you're other, and if there's other, there's fear, and then fear just replicates itself, and that creates the collective madness. And so, but the idea being that the conflict, instead of being seen as something bad, is actually part of individuation. It's part of the deeper evolutionary process. And, as I more and more contemplated that, it just made me so inspired, because I realized that maps on, that's a complete articulation of what's happening to our species. But the key thing is, you see, we have all the evidence we need to feel like, wow, things are really bad and we're really, things don't look good and all that. And of course, if we get entranced in that particular viewpoint, like you were saying, then we're in that echo chamber of our own mind where we're just going to attract all the evidence confirming the viewpoint. And then we're just going to be filled with pessimism and despair and hopelessness. And if we identify in that way and have that viewpoint of feeling pessimistic, then we're actually part of the problem. We're actually then going to be creating all the evidence we need to confirm our pessimism in a self-reinforcing feedback loop. But that's pointing at the profound creative agency that each one of us have. Okay. But then quantum physics comes along and actually is saying, well, okay, for example, in the two-slit experiment, which is the major experiment that holographically encodes all of quantum physics in this one experiment, and they were trying to find, well, here's light. What is the nature of light? And they discovered, well, sometimes it manifests as a wave, sometimes as a particle, depending on how it's observed. Okay, and now that's when you, and in my book, that's what I go down that rabbit hole throughout the whole book because it's so profound. But what that means is, okay, is light a wave or a particle? It depends how it's observed. Are we really just, is evil taking over and are we destroying ourselves and there's no hope? Or are we awakening? Well, think about observation has a pregnant, it's related to pregnancy. However we place our attention on, that's our superhero power. That actually is helping to create that particular reality. So if we don't get hooked by the overwhelming evidence of how, things are just so bad, but actually begin to recognize, wait a second, more and more of us are beginning to awaken to our nature. We're opening our heart. We're having the recognition of the dreamlike nature. The more I see that, the more then I embody that. And then I actually, to the extent that I model and embody that, the more that's the universe that I'm going to be conjuring up. So we all have this, it's like this magical power, really, but it's so natural. But to the extent that we're not awake to it, it gets turned against us, and we then unwittingly, compulsively enact it in a destructive way. All that I'm pointing at is trying to shed light on our nature, we have this creative agency and genius and power, all of us, every moment of our lives. And when we actually become conscious of it, then we can express that in a constructive way, in a creative way that helps both us and everyone else instead of destroying ourselves.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so wonderful. I love that analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly. And again, I've talked about the imaginal cells myself in the past. And not only do you have the activated time capsule of the caterpillar automatically you're starting its process in the chrysalis, but also the fact that it fights against the imaginal cells. So not only do you have an evolutionary impulse, but the evolutionary impulse is strengthened by the fact there's this battle going on with the imaginal cells, which are leading the evolution. And it's just such a perfect analogy for where we're at. But it reminds us of our mastery. This is all about our mastery, isn't it? Mastering where we put our focus attention on a moment-to-moment basis. I mean, this is where it all begins, isn't it? Because through our days, and that's why I've suggested to people that they stick post-it notes all over the house, bathroom, mirror, kitchen, cupboard, fridge, to say, what are you thinking about? Where's your focus? Where's your attention? Because until we master that as a default habit, we're going to keep on, I'm not good enough, pretty enough, young enough, rich enough, I'm always a loser, that kind of grunge that goes on in our subconscious. So the mastery can come very simply if we become conscious of our repetitive thinking patterns.
Well, what you're saying, I mean, it's so right on. And if I could just go back to really in a simple way to try to explain quantum physics, because quantum physics, it can feel really esoteric and complicated and intimidating. But, so I'm not a physicist. And when I had the realization of what quantum physics is showing us, it blew my mind. So before quantum physics came onto the scene, physicists thought this world existed objectively, and we were just trying to study it, as these passive witnesses trying to understand, well, what is the nature of this world? And then quantum physics came into the world and into our minds about 100 years ago. And it empirically proved again and again and again that the idea of an objective world is just that, an idea with no correlate in reality at all. To say it differently, quantum physics discovered that the act of observing this universe actually influenced the universe that we are observing. I want to point out that's the description of a dream. Okay. Because when you're in a dream, if you change the way you're viewing the dream, which is just reflecting your own mind, has no choice but to change because it's a function of your viewpoint. So, quantum physics, in my book, I point out, it discovered the dreamlike nature of reality. But the typical corporately trained academic scientists are not trained to understand that. So, quantum physics, there's no debate about it, is the greatest discovery ever in all of history, ever in the realm of science. What the debate is what does it mean? There's all this controversy about what it means. And here, I'm not a physicist. And one of the things that everybody feels is that they haven't discovered what is the central point of quantum physics. The image they use is like, say, if you've never seen a car and you go into a forest and there's an automobile, and wow, what is this strange thing? And you turn on the signal, the windshield wiper, the radio, yeah, but you haven't figured out what is the central idea? What is the car really about? That's what quantum physicists are saying, that we haven't really figured out what is the central point. And what they also say is when we discover it, that it's probably something that's staring us in the face, that's been so simple that we are going to say to ourselves, how can we have been so blind? And here I'm coming in, not a physicist, saying the central point is that quantum physics is discovering, has showing us that we are having a collective dream that we are conjuring up together that's not out there. And that's pointing at that we have this agency in how the dream is manifesting. Okay. So that's the rabbit hole that I go down in the quantum physics book, that the act of observation is creative. It's not passive. Okay. So once again, it's pointing at that we unknowing have this superhero power. Now, if I could just bring in one more thing, because I actually, at this big conference in 2000, like right before the pandemic, I was a speaker and I presented the idea. Now, Tibetan Buddhism has this incredible idea of the hidden treasures. Okay. And in Tibet, the word terma, terma actually translates as the hidden treasures. And every spiritual tradition has this notion that there are these spiritual enlightening treasures that are hidden, different places, whether it's in the earth or in our minds, right? And then they're discovered at exactly when they're needed. But Tibetan Buddhism has really just so articulated this process of these hidden treasures. And it's not a fairy tale. Like these scholars study this hidden treasure tradition, the Dharma tradition. And the idea being that, say, if a community of Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, or they've gotten a little stale and one-sided and fallen asleep, all of a sudden this Dharma, this hidden treasure, will be discovered in the form of whether it's a practice or a blessed object or a teaching or a prayer. Now, the person who discovers it, they just can't share the Dharma. They have to first, if it's a practice, they have to do the practice and then, have this enlightenment from the Dharma. And then when they embody it in that way, then they're empowered to share this hidden treasure with the community, to bring the community back into balance. And one way of understanding Dharma, they're like a key that opens a lock, like a charm that breaks a spell. Okay. And so the idea is that hidden, encoded in the multidimensional fabric of this universe are these hidden treasures, and some of which are hidden within our minds. And at exactly the right moment when they're needed, they are discovered. And I'm pointing out that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma, that it came into the world just like when we have a dream. If we get one-sided as an individual, what happens? We have a dream that compensates our one-sidedness and sends us symbols, because symbols are the language of dreams. Well, quantum physics is a symbolic procedure. And what I'm pointing out is that when you see this as the dream, we as a species have gotten off center and, one-sided, off balance, and we have dreamed up quantum physics into the world and into our minds as a compensation to show us, to bring us back to who we are. And what quantum physics is basically showing us is each one of us have this incredible creative power as far as creating our experience of the world and our experience of ourselves. It's like a psychedelic. And it really, when you have this realization of what quantum physics is openly showing us, it unlocks the most incredible creativity, because that's our nature. And that's the very thing that's going to save us, is connecting with our nature. And it's such a cliche, oh, just to connect with your nature. Oh, what does that even mean? What is our nature? Our nature, by its nature, is creative. So when we have the realization of our nature, we embody and express ourselves creatively. And the more we do that, the deeper we realize our nature in a positive feedback loop that creates light in a world of darkness. And that's what quantum physics is showing us.
Yeah, and I think that the quantum physics that you're referring to, the terma that you're referring to, just for viewers, that was really, quantum physics was really discovered by Max Planck, and that was in 1891 to 1893, when we had the seed point of the Neptune-Pluto conjunction that is now blossoming in its sextile right now this year. That's the next step of the seed point, the blossoming, because of course he was the first person to observe that there was a link between consciousness and matter, and that consciousness preceded matter. And what's very interesting about this discussion, Paul, is occasionally I get people who write to me and saying, you've got to get into the fight. You've got to, fight these people, and then these people, and then these people, and these people, and these people, and that's going to take 1,000 years. But actually, what we're talking about here is the shortcut. It's not going via the linear, logical 3D. You've got to do this, and then you got to do this, and then you got to do this, and protests and demonstrations and petitions, blah blah blah. It's actually the shortcut, because it's how things are created. So you shift your mindset and you start to magnetize to you a different reality very quickly, actually. I mean, I've seen this in Joe Dispenza workshops where people get to a different state of being, different mindset, and their reality utterly changes miraculously. So it can be very, very fast. And that's what I try and share with people, that, look, this is the shortcut. And we don't have to go through all those steps and all that grief to get there. But, I'd love you to share also, you mentioned that you use Merlin as a symbol for the mysterious creative force behind reality, because there is magic here as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
Mechanical, there's magic. The universe is sentient. The universe has a sense of humor.
Well, right. And the thing is, one of the things that I couldn't believe when I, did the quantum physics book, because I just read every book I could find on quantum physics, was here are these hardcore scientists, and they're basically saying this world we live in is filled with magic. Okay. And that really, that had a resonance with my experience, but that also just spoke to me because it just felt true. And it was super exciting. And it was pointing at, to me, the creative agency and power that each one of us have, because to connect us with the hidden treasure tradition that we were just contemplating, it's not just like, this terma is discovered, this hidden treasure, which is great, be it quantum physics or, a particular practice or whatever. But what I'm interested in is, how can we participate in the discovery of these hidden treasures? And I'll give you an example. So say if tomorrow when I go out, I have to remember to bring something really important, right? And but I'm afraid, oh, I hope I don't forget it. So say, I'll take my water bottle and I'll put it in front of my front door. So tomorrow, as I'm about to leave my apartment, I see my water bottle and it reminds me, oh, right, I have to bring that really important thing. Okay, now just think about what I'm describing. Myself in this moment is planting a clue in the fabric of the dream for a future self. So for the Paul tomorrow will come across the symbol that I planted in the dream, in the fabric of the dream, of the waking dream. And then when I find the symbol, it helps me to remember what I need to do. Okay. That's really interesting to me. The fact that like one part of me in one moment can actually plant a clue for a future me to remember something. Okay. Now that opens up like my imagination in the sense that, oh, wow, can we conspire with each other and with the universe at large to help us to wake up, to help us to remember, like you were saying, putting these post-it notes all over the place, you know, and I'm pointing out there is a way, absolutely, in a very playful way that's filled with magic, that's not like overly serious. We can actually interact with each other and plant little clues in our just our whatever our lives, our daily, ordinary day-to-day lives in a way that helps us to remember because Tibetan Buddhism, which is, my core practice, even though I synthesize so many different spiritual traditions, in essence, what Tibetan Buddhism is teaching is that it's pointing out our nature. And our nature is, I'm pointing at the heart, is to have an open heart, is to be connected with love, with compassion that when you actually really stabilize that experience, and in Tibet, the word for meditation translates as becoming familiar. When we become familiar with our nature as love, as compassion, then we more and more just can abide in and as that. And the whole practice of Tibetan Buddhism is to just not get distracted from that. And when you actually do get distracted and you forget, to recognize it and just bring yourself back to your heart, to your open heart of love and compassion. That's in essence, and they're pointing out when you connect with your nature, which is to have an open heart, the good heart, His Holiness Dalai Lama calls it the good heart, that is actually contagious, that's a form of being a real activist, of embodying that, because then people feel that and it opens their heart. And that's not separate from being creative, as compared to just being sort of like this mind controlled, propagandized person who just becomes like a parrot and just is it's been programmed and conditioned in a certain way, like we all have, in childhood in any culture. The idea is to connect with our nature as creative beings,
Yeah. It expands
and
our heart's toroidal field. We infect other people with that heart coherence, and on we go.
and that can go in a viral, that can go viral, just and that's what we're talking about. For any of us to really embody that and to become familiar with ourselves and to stabilize that, exactly, then it can be contagious and sort of impact sort of other people in a real way, not just in a new age magical thinking way, but no, we're this is physics. This is actually the way it works. And so then any of us can really become what I call a quantum activist.
Yeah,
It's not my
love
word,
that
other people
phrase.
made
That's
up that
Amrit
word.
Swami,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Amrit Goswami is exactly, he's the one who came up with that phrase. Thank you. And the idea that that is a powerful form of activism, of just embodying, being this real human being with open heart of love and compassion.
Yeah. And it's fascinating about the magic because I walk in ancient woodland every day, whatever the weather. And I always say as I'm going out, universe, show me some magic today. So my
Right.
lens is magic. show me the magic. So I'm looking for magic. So it
Right?
sensitizes me to, to nature, to the trees, the birds, the plants, whatever, the light. I think the light is incredible right now to whatever may emerge, but it shifts your frequency into that expectation, that
Yeah. Well,
pregnancy, if you like.
in the same way that if somebody is open to the magic and this universe is like, synchronistic in nature,
Yeah.
that there is a phenomena called synchronistic phenomena, like Jung, was pointing at, where the psyche, where the opposites of psyche and matter actually become impossible to separate, that they're actually not separate. And the point is that if somebody is open to synchronicities, then what happens? More synchronicities happen. But if
Absolutely.
somebody is like, no, 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 that's crazy, that's new age magical thinking,
You're
and they're
blocking.
holding that viewpoint, then they're not gonna, then the universe is gonna give them all the evidence confirming that there is no synchronicity, and then they have the proof to show the correctness of their viewpoint, but they've entranced themselves by the creative genius of their own mind. That's what I'm pointing at.
Yeah, it's interesting. Carl Jung, you may know, was a very skilled astrologer because it gave him a
Right,
shortcut to people's psyche. And his theory of archetypes, his theory of synchronicity, was based on astrology. But
right.
he didn't admit that publicly because he thought it would have discredited him. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the other thing I love about what you're saying, Paul, is that if I look at a birth chart, that is pure potentiality. It's a flat piece of paper. It's pure potentiality.
Right,
It only takes form and gets meaning when we, as the being who owns that birth chart, start to activate it. As a
right.
child, as an adult, we start to activate it, and that's another, very useful analogy when we're looking at this. So, and I love this whole idea that with this philosophy, there are infinite possibilities. We get
Yeah,
so entrenched into there is only one timeline and it's terrible, it's
yeah,
gloom and doom, and that's not true. There are
yeah,
infinite possibilities. So
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
we open our hearts in this very expansive, yin, receptive, loving way, we live with much less effort because we're magnetizing in the experience we want to have by a frequency match. We don't have to
Yeah.
have a business goal, write a business plan, see the bank manager or crowdfund to get a loan to do X, Y, Z. None of that. You're just setting out a
Yeah, yeah.
frequency and then you get the frequency matches synchronicity back to you.
Well, and what quantum physics says about this is so interesting because so quantum physics was really trying to understand and discover what is, what are the building blocks of this physical world. And it went down and down in scale to smaller and smaller degrees to the microstructure of the universe. And what they found was very interesting. They didn't find anything having to do with matter. They found
Yeah.
mind. They found consciousness. And they came up with this idea of elementary particle. And here's how they describe an elementary particle. At every moment, these elementary particles exist in every and any state of potentiality they ever could. Okay. But then at the moment of observation, one of those possibilities actualizes, and all the other possibilities they disappear into parallel universes. And then the very next moment, the same thing. The elementary particle has every and any possibility of how it can manifest, and the next moment, how it's observed, it'll actualize in a particular way, right? Now, what that means is so profound, because what that means is that even if one of those possibilities, and if it's highly ridiculously, and this is a quote from a quantum physicist, improbable, that could actually be the reality that manifests this very moment. And what that means is that the fact that our species could actually sufficiently awaken in this moment, quantum physics is saying, oh, that's completely within the realm of the possible. And so if we then sort of close off to that possibility and think, oh, no, 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 all the evidence, things are really bad, we're just destroying ourselves, well, then you're not in touch with reality because quantum physics is saying, no, one of the practically infinite possibilities is that our species can awaken. And I would suggest if you're not then investing your attention in that, and considering that, then what in the world are you thinking? So quantum physics is actually dispelling the sense of pessimism and despair and hopelessness, and it's offering us going, no, everything in a way is in our hands, and it's a great responsibility. We're not just these passive victims, but we are the dreamers. We're the co-dreamers
Yeah.
of how this is happening. And what I'm pointing out is that when enough of us who've actually had this recognition and stabilized it come together, we can actually, it's what I call, we can dream ourselves awake.
Yes.
Okay, that's the
Yeah.
phrase. And I didn't come up with that phrase. A number of people say that. But to me, that really captures our situation, that when enough of us have this lucidity to the dreamlike nature and connect with each other, and we have the realization of our own creative agency in how the dream is manifesting, we can configure each other in a way, get in sync with each other, get in phase with each other, activate our collective genius, and we can dream ourselves awake. And this is to consciously participate in our own evolution. That's what all of this is about. That's what's getting reflected back to us via the world. And it's all a question, do we recognize that or not? And if we don't recognize it, then we're fated to continue to destroy ourselves. But if we recognize it, I mean, that's the good news. That's what's available to us.
And when you're talking, Paul, about it's it's our interaction with the elemental particle that's also dependent on our state of consciousness, because if we are in an angry place, we're going to interact with that elemental particle to produce another angry situation or an angry experience.
No, but that elementary particle it's not even separate. It's not even
Exactly.
like it's the particle out here and then it's our consciousness out here. No, you see, quantum physics, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, it discovered that this universe is a seamlessly interconnected whole.
Yes.
So there's not separate things that are interacting. There's not us as an observer that's separate, that's observing the very thing we're observing. No, the fact that we're interacting, there's no two separate processes, the observer observing the observed. No, it's all one quantum system.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I could just point out one of the most amazing things that for me that has come out of quantum physics, and I point this out under the umbrella of quantum physics has unwittingly, in a sense, promoted itself to become a modern day spiritual path. And what I mean is this: quantum physics has empirically proven, there's no doubt about it, that there's nothing objective out there separate from us, right? Okay, so that we know. Well, what that means is profound, because if there's nothing objective out there, what happens to this subject? Me. If I'm a subject, I have to have an object to have relationship with in order to be a subject. But if there's no object, who am I? You see, what I'm pointing out, the experience of there's an objective world out there and the subjective experience of I exist as a separate self, as an ego, reciprocally reinforce each other and they co-arise together. But if you all of a sudden have the realization there's no objective anything out there, what happened to you as the subject? And all of a sudden, you begin to realize your nature, that you don't exist as a separate self.
Correct.
And that, in other words, not just you don't exist as a separate self, but that who are we? We are interdependent with each other, that there is no separate self, that we are interconnected. And that's the expansion of consciousness where you actually begin to actualize your nature. And that's why the expression of that is love and compassion, because there is no separate self. It's all just you. It's like being in a dream and waking up in a dream and recognizing everybody is the dream character. They're all embodied reflective aspects of you. And the energetic expression of that is love and compassion. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on what you were saying earlier, Paul, recognizing that we have a choice, it's that beautiful paragraph of yours that I read out earlier, that we have a choice as to where we focus our attention. I mean, I had a health scare last June, and there was a very, very obvious medical timeline appearing before me of biopsies and tests and people in white coats and hospital visits. Very, very obvious. That was the obvious way to go. And I did absolutely spin for 2 days, but then I got a grip thinking, this is a personal test for me. And I said, no, I'm not going to follow that path. I'm absolutely not. I'm going to get back into my mastery. I'm going to create a totally different timeline for myself that is not that. And so it was getting a grasp of my state of being, rather, as well as many other things I did, food and drink and lots of things. But it was the biggest element by far was my state of being, that I'm not
Right.
giving no focus and attention to that whatsoever. I'm going to give all my focus and attention to radiant health. And the whole thing disappeared.
Right.
The whole thing just evaporated. But
Right.
just before we close, I'd really just love, again, to sort of quote what you were saying in the book, because I think it's a lovely place to start to close down our discussion. Was you talk to these times being similar to how Copernicus placed the sun at the center of the solar system, his whole heliocentric theory. Quantum physics places the light of consciousness at the center of the creation of the universe. And
Yeah.
that's so exquisite. And do you believe, as I profoundly believe right now, that our co-creation abilities are being awakened much more fully because we're currently in a
Right.
consciousness revolution?
Yeah. How I would say that is that in the alchemical sort of container of the human psyche, there is increased pressure, unlike ever before. I mean, we're all feeling it. The world we live in, whether you call it going mad or, just in a very dark time, but everyone is feeling it because we're not separate from the non-local field. And what I'm pointing out is that instead of just, oh, let me split and go numb, dissociate, enact my addictions, or just check out or go belly up, there's a way of consciously holding that creative tension, the
Yeah.
tension of the opposites that all of us are feeling, in our own psyche, in our own being, that out of that something, I think of here in his work, Jung calls it the transcendent function, something we as a conscious ego couldn't create by ourselves. All of a sudden, there's some form of like this revelation, because times like this, where would seem really dark, where there's a collective psychosis going on, also coincide with times of when people have revelations.
Yeah.
And it's very much just like the psyche. When in an individual psyche, when we are really struggling, and if we're holding that, that inner state of tension in a conscious way, out of that, we'll have a dream. The unconscious will compensate. It'll give us a symbol. We'll have like this new idea. And that's what I'm pointing out, that in the same way that for an individual, when a person gets really sort of in trouble and suffering and struggling, that oftentimes if they're able to hold that darkness in a certain way without splitting, that all of a sudden they'll have some form of deeper, something, like a new idea or expansive consciousness. And this isn't me. In his work, Jung is making the analogy, just like in an individual that happens, that in times of great darkness for an individual, the light can break through. This is very, archetypal. It's very alchemical. The idea, what our job is hidden within the darkness is the germ of the light. And so here's Jung who's saying, just like in an individual, when in times of great darkness, if they hold it in a certain way with integrity, the light can emerge. The same thing is actually happening as a species. There's a time of great darkness, but if we as individuals are able to hold what's getting activated in us, and it could even be one of us. In his work, Jung uses a beautiful example. He says, when you have this water, like a glass of water, and you have sugar, grains of sugar, and you dissolve each grain by itself, each one will dissolve and dissolve, and then it reaches the saturation point, and you add one more grain of sugar, and a crystal manifests.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
he says, he goes, that's the way that symbols, and he also calls the transcendent function the reconciling symbol. That's the way symbols will manifest in the unconscious. And I'm pointing out that any one of us having realization of our nature, seeing the dreamlike nature, seeing their shadow, understanding the quantum nature of reality. There are a lot of different ways of saying the same thing. Any one of us seeing that, having that expansion of consciousness could be that grain of sugar that catalyzes an awakening in the collective unconscious.
Absolutely. Well, you don't get the pearl without the grit in the oyster.
Right,
You need the darkness to be the catalyst to grow more light, because if we take the pandemic, that was actually a huge catalyst for humanity, because
right.
otherwise humanity would have been same old, same old, same old, without much change. That was a huge catalyst. And so often it's that, well, this is how we grow, isn't it? It's the challenge in life, the tough stuff is how we grow and surmount and go beyond and create something beyond that challenge.
Yeah. And if I could just say about that, like one of my teachers, this great Tibetan Lama who's here visiting me a few years ago, and he said to me, and he had probably said it a million times, but I had never heard it before, but it really got in. He goes, in Tibet, all the greatest of the practitioners, they became enlightened, and it wasn't because things were going great. No, it was because they had obstacles in their life, but they were able to hold the obstacles in a way that catapulted them into enlightenment. And think about, here's the Buddha, the story of the Buddha. He's sitting under the Bodhi tree. He's about to become enlightened. What happens? All of the dark forces of the evil one comes and is trying to seduce him or tempt him or distract him or torment him. And I point out in my work, so on one hand, that though those evil energies seem like they're obscuring Buddha's realization, but I point out, no, they were actually helping him, that they helped him to develop the muscle of realization. And then just to personalize this, I've learned in my work, because here I am, I'm in this role of trying to help, to bring light and, to really shed light on the darkness and help people to awaken. And my experience is the more I do that, the more, in a way, at certain moments, I'll get assaulted by these darker forces. And I've learned, oh, that's the best news I've heard all day. That's showing me that I'm on the right path. Instead of interpreting that like, oh, I really have a problem and I'm really screwed up and I have to fight against them and all that. No, I've learned to understand, of course, that it makes perfect sense as I more and more, bring forth this light that's helping people. Of course, it's going to illumine the darkness because the powers of darkness will be unemployed as more and more people get this. So they're doing everything they can to stop me. But I'm very thankful that I've really stabilized the understanding that no, of course, that's a sign that I'm on the right path. And instead of stopping me, it inspires me even further.
Yeah, and wisdom and mastery come after challenge, not after ease. They're learned through challenge, not ease. And look at
Yeah,
your beautiful analogy of the butterfly cells fighting against the imaginal cells. If there
yeah,
wasn't that battle, the butterfly may never have fully emerged and become
right. It
a
would
larva.
not.
So it's that challenge. So this is the opposite of spiritual bypassing, because, as you say, we are able to hold both the darker side of life and the lighter, just like the day and the night and the winter and the summer. We can hold both, but still grow beyond the challenge. And that's where wisdom and mastery lie in my book.
Yeah.
Wow. So this has been an amazing conversation, Paul. I've been really grateful to have it. And I hope, for the people listening, this has added sort of depth and much greater understanding to what often I'm sharing in my videos, but it will really help people to understand a great deal more, because, you've done so much profound study, Paul. And yeah, I know we're going to put your information below, your website, where people can connect with you. And I think you have some classes coming up soon as well.
Yeah, yeah. I just recently started every like 2 times a month, the first and the third on Thursdays of every month. I'm just, and just spontaneously for an hour and a half showing up online, whoever wants to join me, and there's no structure or plan. I just start sharing whatever's on my mind, and then the second half, it's a 90 minutes. So the second 45, just open it up for Q&A. And I think it's a great forum for people who are interested in this type of work to really even more take it in and to deepen their familiarity. Because all that I'm really pointing at is that, yeah, we, each one of us, have this amazing superhero power of being able to create our experience of our lives and of the world. But to the extent we're not aware of it, then it gets turned against us and kills us. And so, it's such good news that we're plugging into in our work. And part of it, very naturally, is just wanting to share. So yeah, that's the idea of these classes. And I think there'll be info, think on your site about that. And yeah, so that's just a new thing. Yeah.
And remember, everybody watching this, you have choice where to put your focus and attention. Put post-it notes around the house if you tend to forget, because we all tend to forget. And
Right.
also have a delete key. Somebody once told me, have a delete key. Whenever you have a negative word or a negative thought, mine is fun and freedom. So if ever I have a negative thought, I'll just say to myself, or say it out loud, fun and freedom. And that's my kind of delete key, not to pursue that rabbit hole of, oh my
Right.
God, not young enough, rich enough, pretty enough, or was it, that whole grunge that all of us can get into. So that
Right.
delete key is really helpful. So
Yeah.
thank you, Paul, for all your time and your knowledge and your wisdom and your expertise. It's been great to share with you.
Yeah. I just want to thank you so much, really, from my heart. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, and sending loads of love, as always, to all of you out there. Hope you've really got a lot out of this conversation. God bless you, Paul. Thank you. Bye.